When drug cartels, directly linked to a hostile foreign regime, kill tens of thousands of Americans year after year. Does the United States have the right to just abandon law enforcement and fight back with lethal military force?
That's not just a hypothetical question anymore. It's the central conflict playing out right now in our hemisphere.
And that's exactly what we're doing today. A deep dive into the administration's pivot from, police action to kinetic military action. We're talking about Operation Southern Spear.
Exactly. Our source material today is a mix of internal strategy memos and, frankly, some blistering international reports. And they all paint a picture of an administration walking a very, very fine legal line.
So our mission here is to really analyze the U.S. justification for this. I mean, they're calling cartels narco-terrorists and claiming this is an invasion.
And we need to look at how that aggressive stance is fracturing alliances and leading to a massive military escalation.
Yeah.
What we need to understand is the government is essentially trying to unilaterally rewrite the rules of engagement to protect the homeland from a threat that historically we've always treated as criminal.
And I'll be trying to unpack those claims while you'll be explaining the real-world consequences. Specifically that huge buildup of 15,000 U.S. personnel sitting in the region right now.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with the core conflict. The administration's focus is just on the raw numbers. The constant flow of drugs has led to the deaths of, and this is their phrase, tens of thousands of Americans.
And because of that, they've declared it a severe national security threat. That declaration is what justifies, in their eyes, a totally new strategy.
A strategy that began by just reclassifying the enemy.
Yes. They designated key groups, Venezuela's Cartel de los Soles and the gang Tren de Aragua, or TDA as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs.
And that's the key, right? The FTO label.
It's absolutely critical. Once a group is labeled an FTO, it just radically changes the legal toolkit the military has at its disposal.
What makes this so aggressive is that the administration isn't just targeting a cartel. They're explicitly linking the Cartel de los Soles directly to the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro.
Precisely. They're arguing this isn't just a criminal enterprise, it's a state-sponsored tool. Maduro and others in his regime were already charged with narco-terrorism back in 2020.
So the U.S. claim is that the regime is using drugs as a, quote, weapon to flood the United States.
And by framing it that way, you shift the whole narrative. It's no longer just drug trafficking. It becomes an act of hostility sponsored by a foreign state.
Which then leads us to maybe the most shocking legal move they've made domestically, labeling this whole thing an invasion.
And to do that, they pulled out a law that's, it's almost an antique. The Alien Enemies Act.
The Alien Enemies Act. I had to look this one up.
Most people do. It's a rarely invoked law, 50 U.S.C. 21, dates back centuries. It allows the president to declare that a group like TDA is perpetrating an invasion or predatory incursion.
So they're saying the drug crisis is now a form of irregular warfare.
And that reframes everything. The rules of engagement completely change. We went from the Coast Guard's traditional approach.
Visit, board, search, and seizure. VBSS, basically a police bust at sea.
Right. From that to lethal strikes as a first option.
The Secretary of State was incredibly blunt about this. He said they chose to destroy vessels, not intercept them, to send a deterrent message.
Chillingly clear, yes. He said the goal is to stop them when the U.S. blows up and get rid of them. It's deterrence through destruction, not arrest.
And that strategy has real consequences. We're talking at least 20 strikes, maybe 80 people killed. So to justify this in front of the world, the administration is using three, let's call them novel legal pillars.
They're trying to move the whole issue out of the criminal justice system and into the laws of armed conflict. The first pillar is self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter.
And President Trump's argument was that the sheer number of drug deaths inside America is the equivalent of an armed attack on the nation.
But this is where the U.S. view just completely diverges from decades of international law and consensus.
Because an armed attack has always meant something like 9/11, right? A military action, a physical invasion.
Absolutely. International law experts are almost unified on this. They argue that shipping drugs to willing customers, no matter how tragic the outcome, just does not legally qualify as an armed attack.
So the U.S. is basically asking the world to accept a massive expansion of what self-defense means.
They are. They're essentially saying a domestic public health crisis should be treated like a military strike.
Okay, so if the self-defense argument is, let's say, a tough sell internationally, what's pillar number two?
Pillar 2 is the terrorism designation itself, the FTO label. The U.S. argues that by calling these groups terrorists, the rules of engagement change and destruction becomes justified.
But again, does just calling a group a terrorist automatically give you the right to sink their boats in international waters?
Not according to pretty much anyone else. The consensus is that one country unilaterally labeling a group a terrorist does not automatically make military action against them legal.
So the existing treaties, the international agreements.
They all focus on judicial cooperation, seizing assets, criminal sanctions, not blowing people up. Critics say the U.S. is using the FTO label as a pretext to just bypass all of that.
Which brings us to the third and, frankly, a most unprecedented pillar, declaring that an armed conflict exists with these cartels.
A non-international armed conflict, or NIA to be specific. This is a huge legal claim.
And if an NIA actually exists, what does that permit?
It would permit the U.S. military to target these groups whenever and wherever they are found under the laws of war. They've even called the people on the boats unlawful combatants, which strips them of any POW-type protections.
But how does a criminal network, a cartel, even meet the legal standard for an armed conflict?
Well, the experts say it doesn't. There's no basis for the claim. An NIAC usually requires an organized group to be fighting in a way that displaces government control over territory. Think of a civil war or a long-running insurgency.
Not drug running.
Not drug running. By using the laws of war this selectively, just to label enemies and remove their rights, the U.S. is setting a really dangerous precedent that could easily backfire on its own forces somewhere else down the line.
Okay, and this is where the cost of that aggressive legal strategy really starts to show up on the world stage. While the U.S. is focused on the homeland, some of our closest allies are signaling profound disagreement.
The fallout has been huge. I mean, look at the United Kingdom, one of our absolute closest partners. London quietly suspended intelligence cooperation with the U.S. and the Caribbean.
Wow. Suspending intel sharing? That's a massive deal.
It's an extraordinary sign of distrust. The U.K. believes this U.S. military campaign is not in line with international law, and they want no part of it. They're avoiding complicity.
So it's creating this huge gap in regional security all over a legal disagreement.
It is, and it's not just the U.K. Look at Colombia, a vital U.S. security partner in the region. They've reportedly suspended intelligence sharing as well.
So our two key partners in the region for this kind of work have both pulled back.
And Colombia's president has gone even further. He's called for an investigation into potential war crimes connected to these strikes, which have killed citizens from several countries. This isn't just friction. It's an open rebuke.
And it's not just foreign allies. We're seeing questions at home, too. Bipartisan members of Congress sent a formal letter asking for the specific legal authority for these strikes.
They're asking why the administration suddenly abandoned decades of the established VBSS process in favor of lethal force as a first resort. It's a good question.
So with all this pressure, legal questions, allies backing away, the administration's response was to double down.
To escalate. Massively. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced Operation Southern Spear. The goal, he said, is to defend our homeland, remove narco-terrorists from our hemisphere, and secure our homeland.
And this isn't just a name. This is a military buildup we haven't seen in the region for decades. We're talking about the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, 8 warships, and roughly 15,000 personnel.
15,000. You have to let that number sink in. That is not a counter-drug mission. That is a full-scale war-fighting force.
And having a carrier group there, that gives the U.S. the ability to do more than just sink small boats, right?
Oh, absolutely. It enhances the capability to conduct potential strikes inside the sovereign territory of Venezuela. And President Trump hasn't been shy about it. He's publicly mused that the land is going to be next.
So Venezuela's reaction must have been predictable.
Immediate and equally aggressive. Their defense minister put the country on a state of maximum alert. They've mobilized around 200,000 troops and put their entire military arsenal on operational readiness.
They see it as a direct threat to their sovereignty.
They're framing it as an act of U.S. aggression, plain and simple. And this whole situation, especially with the U.S. offering a reward for Maduro's arrest, it brings up the specter of 1989.
The invasion of Panama.
Exactly. The illegal U.S. invasion to capture its head of government, an act condemned by the UN. Critics are saying this new move risks totally undermining U.S. credibility on the world stage when it comes to the use of force.
Okay, so let's try to sum this up. What does it all mean? The U.S. is using labels like invasion and narco-terrorism to shift from a criminal justice problem to a direct military conflict.
All to protect citizens from a domestic drug crisis.
And this approach is being legally opposed by our closest allies and the international community, but it's being backed by the sheer force of a 15,000-person military deployment.
Right. The core takeaway for you is that the U.S. has drawn a line in the sand. They're saying the threat to the homeland from these state-sponsored criminal groups is so bad that it justifies changing the rules of the game entirely
It transforms a really complex law enforcement challenge.
into a high-stakes military standoff. And it forces every other nation in the region to make a choice. Do you side with U.S. security goals, or do you uphold the international laws that the U.S. now says are not enough to meet this threat?
Which leaves us with a final question for you to think about. If a hostile foreign regime is actively weaponizing drug trafficking, and it results in the deaths of tens of thousands of your fellow citizens, should the traditional rules of international law be allowed to protect that regime from a direct military response aimed at saving American lives? Something to consider as Operation Southern Spear continues to unfold.